Greetings and welcome to Word Magazine. This is Jeff Riddle. I'm the pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. And in this episode of Word Magazine, we're going to be talking about changes that are coming to your modern Bibles. And by that, we mean changes that are being made to the scholarly handbooks of the Greek New Testament, the United Bible Society 6th edition, and the Nestle-Aland 29th edition. Those should be published soon, and they represent updates of the scholarly text or the modern critical text of the Greek New Testament. And changes that are being made to these editions will likely trickle down to changes made to modern translations of the Bible in various languages, to commentaries upon the Bible, to biblical studies, exegesis of passages. And so it's not an inconsequential thing when there are changes made to the Greek New Testament. So that's going to be our topic today. And it was spurred on by an article that was published on Wednesday. Today's Thursday, Wednesday, just yesterday, by Peter Gurry on the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, giving some insights into the changes that are coming based on a small amount of information that's been released by the German Bible Society. Before we move on to the topic, let me just say thanks to those who have been listening, and especially those who have been sending me some notes recently and suggesting topics. That's very helpful. And I can't promise I'll always do the topic, but I do appreciate hearing from you. And some of you have asked what's happened to the podcast, because I haven't done one in a while. In fact, I look back, the last one I did was May the 28th, and I did kind of three in a row in May on in a series on Scribner. And then I've taken a bit of a break. Part of that's been a busy time and family and ministry and some normal summer ministries that I do, including organizing a youth conference and our vacation Bible school in my church and a family vacation that we took. And also, just in general, over this year, I've probably done less podcasting because I've been trying to give a little bit more time and attention in this year to some writing projects. I completed an article, for example, on Luke 23, verse 34a, Christ's intercessory prayer from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that will be appearing in the July 2025 issue of Puritan Reformed Journal. I also, over the last couple of months, completed writing two chapters for a book that's going to be published by the Bible League Trust in the UK. The book is going to be titled It Is Written. And the authors, we got a note from the editor the other day, and it's some 650 plus pages of content. So it's a big anthology, number of authors, especially from the UK, addressing various issues related to bibliology. But I was honored to contribute two chapters to the book. One is a study of the Comma Ioanneum, 1 John 5:7. And I used quite a bit of material in the chapter that I wrote for that book, based on the blog that I did a couple of years ago, not blog, but podcast I did a couple of years ago. And several people have asked about that over since I did it. And so now that material will be available in a written form. And then I also contributed a chapter to that same book that's on the ending of Mark 16, 9 through 20, a defense of the traditional text. And that's a topic I've written on before, but this one is a little bit different in that in this chapter article, I devoted a little bit more attention to the internal arguments for the authenticity of Mark 16, 9 through 20. And I feel sure I'll podcast on that book. It is written once it's completed, but it should be done by the end of the year. And then I've also been given time to compiling and editing the Reformation Bible Society seminar papers that came out of the papers that were delivered at our inaugural Reformation Bible Society meeting in August of 2024 in Lynchburg, Virginia. And we have now a collection of papers from that conference that are going to be called the Reformation Bible Society Seminar Papers, and it's going to be the Reformation Text and the Septuagint. And so we finally have a working draft of that, and we'll be giving it to an editor to do a copy edit of it and then to typeset it. And we hope that that will be published by the end of the year. So you can get your Christmas list ready and you can get that book. And in addition to editing it, I contributed a chapter to it that was my paper that I did at the conference last year. And it's on the earliest use of the Septuagint in the earliest church, I think is the title of it, or the earliest church and its use of the Septuagint. I don't know, but that's coming out. I've also been trying to work on a collection of the talks that I did when I was in England last year at the Salisbury conference. I did spoke at a conference there and did several talks around the theme of experiencing the Word of God. And I'm hoping maybe by the end of this year that I can put that out as a, sort of like a booklet, just a collection of those uh, talks that were given at the conference and a couple sermons that were given at the Emmanuel Church there in Salisbury, England. So I've given a bit more time to writing, and that's meant less time for podcasting. But I'm back in the groove today. Again, thank you for keeping an interest in the podcast, and thank you for submitting ideas. And I do keep a record of those, and as I'm able to, I try to get to them. So the topic today, again, is the changes that are coming to your modern Bibles, the changes that are coming in particular to the scholarly handbooks that are published and then that are used in Bible colleges and seminaries and divinity schools and used by Bible translators and so forth. And some of this information is old hat to some of you, but for those who are new to this type of conversation, if you'll bear with me, when it comes to the text of the New Testament and the scholarly text, if you go to a college, Bible college, or seminary, and you sign up to study Greek, Introduction to Greek, there are two major handbooks that will most likely be used. Of course, we're in the digital age, and you may be reading the text from your phone or from a computer, but if you have a hard copy, and most people who are seminary students, for example, they're going to get a hard copy to read. There are two editions that are used. One of those is the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece. And the Nestle Aland comes from Eberhard Nestle, who was the original editor of this series, and then Kurt Aland, along with his wife Barbara, were influential editors of it from the mid to late 20th century. And so this is now on its 28th edition. The 28th edition came out in 2012. And again, with anticipation after 13 years, now there's going to be a 29th edition. I don't know if it's going to come out this year or be published next year. And then the second one, this one's got the nice blue cover. The Nestle on 28th edition has the blue cover, and so will the 29th, we anticipate. The other edition, handbook edition that is used, has this sort of brick red cover, and this is from the United Bible Societies, and it is simply called the Greek New Testament. The copy I have in my hand here is the most recent one up till this year, and that is the fifth revised edition. And this is published, both of these are published by the German Bible Society. They basically are the gatekeepers, and there are two different editions. The text of the Greek New Testament is exactly the same in both. And that's been the case since the UBS, United Bible Society, third edition of 1975, and the Nestle Aland 26th edition of 1979. Same exact text in both of these printed editions. The difference is in the apparatus. The Nestle Aland has a much more detailed apparatus. It's an amazing treasure trove of information that's packed into a very small space. The United Bible Society's edition has a thinner apparatus, and it is supposedly more geared toward translators of the Bible and addresses concerns they might have on making a proper translation of the Bible. So, again, if you're going to study the Greek of the New Testament, you're going to use one or the other, and most serious students are going to have both. And of course, we're in the digital age. You have digital editions of the text. You can find them online, but you can also have these hardbound editions as well. Of course, the huge thing that's happened in the 21st century has been that there's a major renovation that's going on of the modern critical text, which is the basis of modern translations of the Bible. And this major overhaul of the Greek New Testament came about with the development of a particular method, computer-based method that was used to compare variants and manuscripts and their connections to other manuscripts that showed various similarities. And this method is called the Coherence-Based Genealogical Method, the CBGM. And it was developed by a man in Germany named Mink. And so he developed this method. And then this method has been used again in this major revision of the Greek New Testament in a project that's known as the Editio Critica Maior, or the ECM. And there are a series of, again, hardbound published books that are more extensive studies of the text, more than you would find in the handbooks. And this is the ECM that I'm holding here, which is just a third volume in a multi-volume ECM edition of the Acts of the Apostles. And had someone give me this, by the way, and give me several copies of the ECM, including this one of the Acts of the Apostles. And so this started in the early 21st century, and the Netzel Aland 28th edition was the first volume to make use of the ECM findings in a handbook. And the ECM findings were applied in Nestle Aland, or NA 28, to the Catholic epistles, meaning James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. The rest of NA 28 was the same as NA 27, but they changed the Catholic or general epistles in NA 28. And now the anticipation is with NA 29 and um, um, the sixth now coming revised edition of the UBS. Sorry, having a brain pause there. That there are going to be, people are anticipating what are the changes that are going to be found in these new printed editions, the UBS 6 and the Nestle Aland 29th edition. And again, the thoughts on this were kindled a bit this past week when Dr. Peter Gurry, formerly of Phoenix Seminary in Phoenix, Arizona, now at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri, Midwestern being a Southern Baptist seminary. He published an article on the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, noting some early indicators that have appeared out of Germany as to what the changes might look like in these new printed editions of the Greek New Testament. So let me go ahead and pull up, if I can, the blog article by Peter Gurry. This was published on Wednesday, July 16 of 2025, and it is titled Changes to Expect with UBS 6/NA 29. And he noted that on the German Bible Society website, that the UBS 6 isn't set for release until October the 19th of this year, October 19th of 2025. But he said there is now available a reader's edition. Let's pull that up. And you can find it there on the German Bible Society shop option. And you can see for a cool 36 pounds, you can pick up this reader's edition. And of course, a reader's edition is an edition of the Greek New Testament that includes a glossary at the bottom of the page and gives you a reference for defining words that appear with less frequency within the New Testament so that it can aid your facility in reading more quickly through the Greek New Testament. And so, oddly enough, this reader's edition of the Greek New Testament, sixth edition from the United Bible Society, has come out before the actual UBS sixth edition, the regular handbook edition. And he also points out in this article that the ECM of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, is set for release in December. And as we're going to see, that's going to mean that Matthew is not changes to Matthew based on the CBGM and the ECM is not going to take place in the NA29 UBS 6th edition. Now, what I thought we would do is just look at the introduction, which Gary provides a link, and appears on the website for the German Bible Society. And this is a brief introduction to this reader's edition, but it gives us some insights as to the changes that have been made to the handbooks. And so let's just look at a little bit of this. The Greek New Testament, a reader's edition, revised edition, based on the text of the Greek New Testament 6 revised edition, UBS 6. And then it lists the editors, edited by Holger Strutwolf, who's the director for the Institute for New Testament Textual Research, Hugh Houghton, Christos Karolus, David Parker. This is D.C. Parker from the University of Birmingham. Some of you remember the sparring that I did a couple years ago with Peter Gurry when he said, oh, there hasn't been a big shift in the goal of New Testament textual criticism, because Parker has advocated that we shouldn't talk about the text, singular, of the New Testament, but of the texts of the New Testament, that there is no authoritative text. And I had noted a couple years ago how the goal of New Testament textual criticism has shifted. And Gary said, no, it's been a little shift. Parker's not that influential. And I think we see that he is pretty influential. In fact, he is, as I understand it, the chief editor for the ECM of the Gospel of John. So his ideas will be quite influential when the Gospel of John appears in the new handbooks. Also, Stephen Pisano, David Trobisch. David Trobisch is a German-American scholar. He was the first director of the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. I've read a couple of things that he's written. I might make reference to them a little bit later. I see some of his influence, I think, whether directly or indirectly, especially as we'll see later, related to the sequencing of the New Testament books. And then finally, Klaus Wachtel, also very involved at the Institute for New Testament Textual Research in Münster, Germany. Tells you about the dictionary that's used for the Reader's Edition by Barclay M. Newman. Let's go down and look at the table of contents. So one of the things you immediately notice about this Reader's Edition, and I presume this will also be true. In fact, I think it will be explicitly stated in the preface we're about to read for the UBS 6 and the Nessalon 29th edition, is going to be a change in the sequencing of the books of the New Testament. And so when you look at this, it starts off with the Gospel of Matthew, Kata Mattheon, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke, Gospel of John. We're used to that. Then the Acts of the Apostles. But here's what's different. After the Acts of the Apostles, the next book is not going to be Romans. It's going to be the book of James, and then 1st and 2nd Peter, and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. And so this is a pretty significant change, not in the text. There are significant changes in the text, but in the sequencing of the books. And there is, in fact, I know I've heard this from David Trobisch in some of his writings, that in early Christianity, in the early transmission of the New Testament writings, there was a tendency among some to group together the Acts of the Apostles with the so-called Catholic or general epistles, and this was known as the Prax Apostolos. So Acts, James, 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. Then you have the Pauline letters, starting with Paul's letter to the Romans, and 1st Corinthians, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. But now we've got another significant change. After 2nd Thessalonians, there is the book of Hebrews. So Hebrews is not included with the general epistles. It is now included with the Pauline epistles. Now, personally, I like that because I believe in Pauline authorship of Hebrews. It was widely believed in the early church. Now I say I like that. I like the fact that Hebrews is grouped with the Pauline epistles, considered a Pauline epistle. We'll talk later about evaluating the wisdom of changing the sequence of the books. Then after Hebrews is 1st Timothy, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, the so-called pastoral epistles. Then Philemon, and then finally the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation. Still the last book, but now not preceded by Jude, as in standard printed editions today, but by the book of Philemon. So this is a fairly significant change that is coming if the Reader's Edition is the same as the UBS 6 and the Nessalon 29th edition. Let's move on then, and I'm just going to read, it's a pretty short, the preface here, or introduction, at least part of it, to this work. So let's just take a look at this. Introduction, the text of the edition. The Greek text of this edition is identical to the text of the 6th edition of the UBS Greek New Testament, UBS 6, and the 29th edition of the Nessalon Novum Testamentum Graece, NA 29. So that's what we were talking about before. Since 1979, the two editions have the same text of the New Testament. And they're saying that's going to be true in the UBS 6 and the NA 29. And that's true of this Reader's Edition, which is based on the UBS 6 edition. At the time of going to press, these two editions are still in preparation. So this Reader's Edition is the first edition of this Greek text. So they're saying this is the first thing to come out, oddly enough. Apparently, they're still working on the apparatus for the handbooks, but the text they feel like is ready to go, and it's the same text as will appear in the handbooks. Like UBS 6 and NA 29, the Reader's Edition follows the Editio Critica Maior, ECM, of the Greek New Testament, insofar as volumes of this edition are already available. So that's what we were talking about earlier. The whole modern Greek New Testament is currently being overhauled. It's being revised, significantly revised. But the next printed edition will only include changes suggested for the Gospel of Mark, the Acts of the Apostles, the Catholic letters, and the book of Revelation. So there won't be changes made to the Gospel of Matthew or to the Gospel of Luke or the Gospel of John or the Pauline letters. Those have not been addressed yet, and supposedly they will be addressed in future editions of the UBS, whether it's the UBS 7th, 8th, 9th, Nestle 30th, 31st, 32nd. It took 13 years between NA 28 and what will likely be NA 29 in either this year or 2026. So maybe it won't be that long. I don't know, but the New Testament is being reconstructed according to this new method. It goes on to explain the ECM is the major critical edition of the Greek New Testament, which is being edited at the Institute for New Testament Textual Research in Münster in cooperation with international teams of scholars. The link to the ECM ensures that the Reader Edition represents the current state of scholarly research into the text of the Greek New Testament. So this gives us the state-of-the-art consideration of the text of the Bible as it is currently seen from Münster. One change compared with previous editions will immediately catch the reader's eye when leafing through the book. The sequence of the 27 New Testament writings has changed in parts. The Catholic epistles now appear between the Acts of the Apostles and the Pauline letters, and Hebrews is placed after 2nd Thessalonians and before the pastoral epistles. In this way, the sequence of writings has been brought into closer agreement with the early Greek manuscript tradition. I'll pause there because I think that assertion is open to challenge. And as I already mentioned, although there might be some things I like about saying Hebrews is counted among the Pauline epistles, there are, I think, some problems with changing what we know now as the traditional ordering of the books in the New Testament. And I'm not sure these changes necessarily, they're justifying these changes by saying this brings it more into line with ancient practices. And I have some ideas about that that lead me to think that isn't necessarily the case. Um, it continues. Da, 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 da. Uh, the order, known from older editions of the Nestle, the UBS Greek New Testament, and in fact from almost all modern Bible translations, goes back to Erasmus in the early 16th century. And I'm giving a talk here in just a couple of weeks at our second annual Reformation Bible Society conference. It's another reason I haven't been able to do podcasts because I'm working on that talk. And my talk is going to be about Erasmus and the ending of Revelation. And I've previously written an article called Erasmus Anecdotes. And one of the things I've discovered in looking at the history of modern scholarship is that in the 19th century, there was a concerted effort to disparage Erasmus and the work of Erasmus in order to undermine the authority and authenticity of the received text. And here is sort of an example of that. They're saying we're going to go back and we're going to have a better order or sequence of the books than that which relied upon the work of Erasmus. That's so outdated. It's so early 16th century. We're going to go back to what it really was in the early church. And again, I've got some questions about that. I'll probably do some more extensive writing study about that in the future. But for now, I'll just leave it there. We know that this change is coming even to the sequencing and ordering of our books in the New Testament. Um, it therefore does not fit well with an edition whose aim is to come as close as possible, not exactly, but as close as possible. We can almost have the proper sequence of the books, just like we can almost have the proper text. It's just right outside of our grasp, but we've got as close as possible as we can to the proper sequencing. The following typographical features appear in the Greek text. This is interesting. Number one, brackets in the text indicate particular doubts of the editors as to whether the enclosed words, or parts of the words are to be reconstructed at the earliest form of the text. Double brackets in the text indicate that the enclosed passages are not considered by the editors to be part of the earliest text. Notice they don't say not to be considered part of the original, because the modern textual criticism is no longer seeking the original. And there, you'll always find this circuitous language. It was considered by the editors to be not to be part of the earliest text, the Ausgangs text, the initial text, the text as far back as we can trace it, though we can't say it's the authorial text or the original text. But an addition at an early stage of the tradition, most of the time that's going to be a total conjecture. They're going to say it wasn't there at the earliest stages, but it was added. It was a very early accretion to the text. Unlike in earlier editions of the Nestle-Aland, the UBS Greek New Testament, including the Reader's Edition, all verses assigned a number within the New Testament are now integrated into the text in double brackets. Now, this is an amazing change that's going to be appearing in the UBS 6 and Nestle-Aland 29th, and supposedly in the editions that come after that. And that is, they're going to be restoring to the text proper verses that were removed. And they say they're going to do it when there is a verse that its removal apparently would interrupt the numbering. And we could think, for example, of Acts 8, verse 37, the confession of the Ethiopian eunuch. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And if you're reading the ESV, you're in Acts 8, verse 36, and the next verse is Acts 8, 38. It skips verse 37. You got to go down into the footnote to find verse 37, along with a note telling you that the editors don't think it's original. Now, however, that verse in the Greek text is going to appear there, and it won't be in the apparatus. It's going to be in the text proper, but it's going to have double brackets around it. And this raises a huge question. Does this mean that in modern Bibles, modern translations of the Bible into various languages, whether it's English or French or Spanish or Polish or Hungarian, will they be restoring Acts 8:37 to the text proper, although they will enclose it in double brackets and have a footnote telling you the editors don't think this is really authentic, but we're including it here so you don't get messed up in the versification of the reading of the text. It notes, previously, this was only the case for individual passages which traditionally enjoyed an exceptional position in the church. For example, Mark 16, 9 through 20, traditional ending of Mark, and John 7, 53 through 8, 11, the pericope adulterae, the woman taken in adultery. Old Testament or quotation from the Old Testament are marked in bold type, and a list of references can be found in the appendix. So uh, that's basically it. Then they give a sample of the text after some symbols. Then here's a sample of the text, and they gave the first 9 chapters of the Gospel of Matthew. This is Kata Mattheon. Of course, this is the reader's edition, and so they have broken it up into paragraph or thought units, and they got an English heading, and I'm sure that will not be the way it will appear in the handbook editions, the UBS 6 or the Nessalon 29th. But for this reader's edition, they have a heading in English, and there are the words, probably words that appear less than 30 times in the New Testament. They appear and are given a brief definition at the bottom of the page, although they're not parsed, so that the reader can uh, build up his speed in reading without having to constantly turn to a dictionary or an online source. He can simply read more fluidly. But anyways, like I said, this only gives us the first 9 chapters. There's chapter 7, 8, and 9. So it's just giving us a little sample. And I wish it had included a little bit more just to verify what they're doing with verses that are among the so-called missing verses, because there are 3 of these in the Gospel of Matthew, but they're all appear past Matthew 9. So one of those is Matthew 17, verse 21. This is one that's typically removed in the handbooks, and therefore it's removed in many modern translations of the Bible. And this is the place where, at the healing uh, of the son of the man, he asked for healing and says, "Your disciples after uh, the Mount of Transfiguration," and he asked Christ about his I'm looking at 17 verse 21. Did I say 11? Verse 21. And Christ responds and says, "Howbeit this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting." So that's not appearing in the current editions of modern critical text. Apparently, it will be restored to the text proper, but placed in double brackets. Another one is in Matthew 18, verse 11, "For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost." That will now apparently appear in the text proper, but it will be in double brackets. And the third is Matthew 23 and verse 14, which is in the woes that Christ pronounces on the scribes and Pharisees. "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation." And now apparently that will be um, included in the text, whereas it was removed in previous editions. It will appear in the text, but within double brackets. And so that is quite a significant change that is coming. So let me just go ahead and get out of that for a second. Let me just share a few reflections now. And I think Guri summarized it as 3 significant changes. And according to what appears in this introduction, I would agree with that. So the first significant change we could talk about is the fact that the new edition, the UBS 6 and the Nessalon 29th, when they come out, they are going to include updates of the Gospel of Mark, the Acts of the Apostles, and the book of Revelation based on the material in the ECM using the CBGM. And the Catholic epistles, which were already updated, they will continue. And so they're slowly building this complete overhaul. And this is going to raise questions, though, because there are some changes in Mark, in Acts, in Revelation that will be significant. And one of those relates to Revelation 21 and verse 6. I did a podcast on this already. I'm not sure if it was earlier this year or in 2024. And there's a significant change that is coming. Whereas in the traditional text at Revelation 21:6, it says, I'm reading here from the Authorized Version, and he said unto me, it is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. But what we're going to see with the ECM, and it will apparently appear in these textbooks, rather than having it say, it is done, I am Alpha and Omega, it's going to say, I am becoming, or I have become Alpha and Omega. And there are some major theological implications, Christological implications for that. It almost sounds like an adoptionistic Christology. And so the first major thing is there's going to be a change to the text of Mark, Acts, and Revelation. And some of those changes will have theological doctrinal significance. Second major issue that arises from these initial insights is the sequencing of the books. Um, Again, we've noted this already. Uh, Modern printed Bibles follow an order we're used to: the Gospels, the book of Acts, the Pauline epistles, the general epistles, and the book of Revelation. And now they're saying, no, we're going to have it as the Gospels, the book of Acts, the Catholic epistles or the general epistles, the Prax Apostolos, then the Pauline epistles, and we're going to put Hebrews after Second Thessalonians and before First Timothy, and then we're going to have the book of Revelation. And that is a significant change. I wonder how many are the modern evangelicals who have so zealously embraced and defended, tooth and nail defended, the modern critical text. Are they now going to say, we agree with the scholars in Munster, and we're going to embrace this new sequencing of the books of the New Testament, and we're going to begin incorporating this into translations of the Bible? Will the ESV be revised and the ordering of the books in the New Testament be changed based on this change in the handbooks? Now, in some ways, this change isn't something that's new. If you're familiar with the Robinson Pierpont Byzantine text form 2005, they also follow, excuse me, something similar. If you look at the table of contents there, they have the Gospels, they have Acts, they have the Catholic epistles, then they have the Pauline epistles, and they also include Hebrews after Second Thessalonians and before First Timothy. So the UBS 6 and the NA 29 are going to have exactly the same sequencing of the New Testament books as in the Robinson Pierpont Byzantine text form. Also, if you're familiar with the Tyndale House Greek New Testament of 2017, they also follow a similar altered sequencing of the New Testament books. They have the Gospels, they have Acts, they have the Catholic epistles, then they have the Pauline epistles. However, they put Hebrews at the end of the Pauline epistles, so after Philemon. So it's the final book before the book of Revelation. So it's sort of similar to what will soon find in the UBS 6 NA 29, but slightly different as well. And again, I think that's a pretty significant change. And I was just thinking about, maybe I'll say some of this in a moment with the final summation. but it just serves, I think, to undermine to a certain degree the stability and familiarity of a Protestant reading of the Bible uh, that we have practiced, received, stood by now for many centuries. And then the third thing after the ECM change and the sequencing of the books would be the restoration of the so-called missing verses and placing them in double brackets. And that also is problematic. It was problematic to remove these verses and to relegate them to the footnotes at the bottom of the page. But I'm not sure that it's any less problematic to include them in the text and then put them in double brackets and include notes that say we're going to put this in the Bible, but we don't really think it's part of Scripture. And this is problematic. And I think that many times these folks are in ivory towers and don't understand how the typical man in the pew thinks about the Bible. Beyond that, just epistemologically, what it says is we don't know what the Bible is. We're not quite sure. And then also on a theological level, if you are certain that these passages are not part of Scripture, not inspired, not original, not authentic, why do you include them? Would you include the epistles of Ignatius? Would you put them in after the book of Revelation? They're not inspired, but they were read by some early Christians. Um, it causes a crisis of authority and a crisis of canonicity on the level of the text when you're putting passages in the New Testament that you're also saying are not part of the New Testament. So, anyways, this is a little introduction to what is coming down the pathway. Some of this we expected, the ECM changes. Some of the things were unexpected, the sequencing of the books and the restoration of the so-called missing verses. Of course, it said they're going to restore ones uh, that would interfere with the versification. I'm supposing they're not going to restore 1 John 5, 7 and 8, or 7b, 8a. I doubt they will put the three heavenly witnesses in and put them in double brackets. It would be amazing if they would do that. And it would be quite uncomfortable for the ESV because they completely removed those verses with not a footnote about it. But anyways, this brings us to a conclusion. I hope that this little survey of what's coming down the path with changes to our modern Bibles is of interest to you and will be helpful for you. Of course, I think it probably at this point goes without saying that I'm a defender of the traditional text. I believe we should hold to the traditional Protestant text, and I don't think we should base translations on the modern critical text. And I think we ought to hold to the text that has been received as canonical. One thing I didn't say about the sequencing of the books, I wonder if there will be people who will want to try to amend some of the classic Protestant confessions of faith, like in Westminster Confession of Faith 1 and Second London Baptist Confession of Faith 1:3, where it lists the canonical books and it lists them in the order with which we are familiar. Now, will there be moves to alter the listing of the book so that it matches up with the sequencing that's now found in modern Bibles? Well, we'll see, won't we? Anyways, I hope this has been helpful. I'll look forward to speaking to you in the next edition or episode of Word Magazine. Till then, take care and may the Lord richly bless you.